Beyond the weight of steel and softness. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Officer Maya Chen walked the cold corridor of Westbrook, women's correctional facility for the first time, her boots echoing against concrete walls that had witnessed more pain than she could ever imagine. She had been warned during training that this job would harden her, that she needed to build walls around her heart to survive in a place where hope came to die. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment. She would lock eyes with inmate number 7429, a woman whose gaze held more stories than all the books in the prison library combined. A woman who would shatter every wall Maya had ever tried to build. Elena Rodriguez sat in the corner of the common area, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that bore the map of 28 years of survival. She had been in Westbrook for 3 years of a 10-year sentence for a crime she committed to protect her younger sister from an abusive partner, a truth buried beneath legal terminology, and a justice system that rarely asked the right questions. The other inmates gave her space, not out of fear but out of respect, because Elena carried herself with a quiet dignity that prison could dim but never fully extinguish. She spent her days in the library, her nights writing letters to a sister who had stopped responding 2 years ago, and her moments in between trying to remember what freedom felt like against her skin. Maya noticed her immediately, though she tried not to. During her first week, she watched Elena help an elderly inmate who struggled with arthritis tie her shoes, saw her break up a potential fight with nothing but calm words and steady presence, observed her reading alone in corners while others shouted and argued their way through another endless day. There was something in Elena's movements that spoke of a gentleness this place had not managed to crush, and Maya found herself looking for her during shift changes, counting the hours until she would patrol the East Wing where Elena's cell stood silent and neat, a small island of order in an ocean of chaos. It started with a book. Maya found it abandoned in the corridor, its spine cracked and pages dog-eared from multiple readings. The cover identified it as a collection of Pablo Neruda's poetry, and she knew without asking that it belonged to Elena, because she had seen her carrying it like a talisman, pressed close to her chest during recreation time. Maya could have simply returned it through official channels, could have placed it in the lost and found box near the guard station, but instead she found herself walking to Elena's cell during evening count, her heart beating faster than it should, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the worn volume. Elena looked up from where she sat on her bunk, and their eyes met in a moment that stretched and bent like light through water. Maya extended the book without speaking, and Elena took it with hands that brushed against Maya's fingers for less than a second, a touch so brief it might not have happened at all, except that both women felt it, like an electric current, sudden and undeniable. Elena thanked her in a voice barely above a whisper, and Maya nodded and walked away, but something had shifted in the air between them, something neither of them could name but both recognized as dangerous. The rules were clear and absolute. Fraternization between officers and inmates was grounds for immediate dismissal and potential criminal charges. Maya had signed documents acknowledging these boundaries, had sat through training sessions that emphasized the power imbalance and ethical violations inherent in any personal relationship across the custody line. She repeated these facts to herself every morning, used them as a shield against the growing awareness that she thought about Elena during her off hours, that she volunteered for shifts that would bring her into Elena's orbit, that she had begun to see the prison not as a building full of criminals but as a cage holding someone who deserved so much more than steel bars and concrete floors. Elena fought her own battle with equal desperation. She had learned early in her incarceration to disconnect, to view the guards as faceless extensions of the system rather than as individuals with their own stories and struggles. It was safer that way, cleaner, a survival mechanism that protected what remained of her heart. But Maya made disconnection impossible. Maya, who checked on the elderly inmates with genuine concern, who never raised her voice even when others did, who carried herself with a kindness that seemed out of place in these harsh hallways. Elena found herself listening for Maya's footsteps, tracking her movements through the facility with an attention that felt both thrilling and terrifying, writing about her in journals that would never see daylight, composing entire conversations in her mind that reality would never allow. They began to find moments, small stolen fragments of interaction that technically violated no rules but danced dangerously, close to the line. Maya would linger during cell checks, asking Elena about the book she was reading, sharing brief observations about weather or news from the outside world. Elena would respond with careful words, offering insights that revealed the sharp intelligence prison had not dulled, the humor that still flickered beneath the surface of her careful composure. They talked about poetry and politics, about family and loss, about dreams deferred and hopes that refused to die completely. They never touched again after that first accidental contact. But the space between them felt charged with all the touches they could not share. The other officers began to notice. Maya's partner, a veteran guard named Sarah who had worked at Westbrook for 15 years, pulled her aside one afternoon and spoke words that landed like stones in Maya's stomach. She said that everyone could see what was happening, that Maya was playing with fire that would burn not just her career but also Elena's chance at parole, that the kindest thing Maya could do was transfer to another facility or harden her heart before someone got seriously hurt. Maya listened and nodded and promised to be more careful, then went home and cried for the first time since taking this job, because she knew Sarah was right and also knew that walking away from Elena felt like cutting off her own oxygen supply. Elena received her own warning from a fellow inmate, a woman serving life without parole who had seen countless guards and prisoners make the same mistake Maya and Elena were making. She told Elena that love had no place in prison, that affection was a luxury that cost too much, that Maya would eventually leave or turn cold or betray her, because that was what always happened when the powerful remembered their power and the powerless remembered their chains. Elena listened and thanked her for the advice, then lay awake that night staring at the ceiling and wondering if it was possible to unlove someone once your heart had made its choice. If she could simply decide to stop feeling the way her entire being lit up when Maya walked past, if wanting something impossible made her weak or simply human. The crisis came on a Tuesday during the lunch shift. An inmate with a history of violence started a fight that escalated quickly, bodies colliding and voices rising, to a roar that brought every available officer running. Maya arrived to find Elena on the ground, her lip bleeding and her eye already starting to swell, having stepped between the attacker and a younger inmate who had frozen in fear. Without thinking, Maya dropped to her knees beside Elena, her hands reaching for Elena's face with a tenderness that had no place in a professional response, her voice breaking as she asked if Elena was okay, her entire body shaking with an emotion that everyone present could identify even if Maya could not name it aloud. The moment lasted perhaps 5 seconds before Maya caught herself, before she stood and resumed her officer stance and helped Elena to her feet with the kind of impersonal efficiency expected of her role. But those 5 seconds were enough. The other officers saw. The inmates saw. The security cameras recorded it all with their unblinking electronic eyes. Maya was called into the warden's office the next morning and given a choice that felt like no choice at all. Resign quietly or face an investigation that would examine every interaction she had ever had with inmate 7429, that would scrutinize and question and potentially destroy both women's reputations in the process. Maya chose resignation. She cleaned out her locker that same afternoon, turned in her badge and uniform, walked out of Westbrook knowing she would never see Elena again unless she wanted to risk Elena's parole chances, risk the fragile future Elena was building one careful day at a time. She did not say goodbye because goodbye would have required seeing Elena one more time, and Maya knew she did not have the strength to look into those eyes and walk away again. She simply left, and the absence of her presence in the facility felt like a wound that would not close. Elena learned of Maya's departure from another guard during evening count. She received the information with the blank expression she had perfected over 3 years of incarceration, thanked the guard for telling her, and returned to her cell where she finally allowed herself to break. She cried for the first time since her sentencing, great wrenching sobs that came from a place deeper than prison, than loss, than all the accumulated pain of her 28 years. She cried for Maya, who had sacrificed her career, for herself, who had to stay behind these walls for 7 more years, for the love that had bloomed in the last place anyone would look for beauty and had been crushed before it. could fully flower. But this is not a story about endings. This is a story about the kind of love that survives impossible circumstances, that waits and hopes, and refuses to accept that steel, and distance can kill. What the heart knows is real. Maya got a job at a community center working with formerly incarcerated women, pouring all her passion for justice into helping people rebuild their lives after prison. She thought about Elena every single day. Elena continued her education program, earned her associate degree, worked in the prison library, and helped other inmates prepare for their own releases. She thought about Maya with every breath. 7 years is a long time to wait. 7 years is also nothing when measured against the depth of feeling that two souls can share in their brief moments of connection. Maya marked each year on her calendar, counting down to Elena's release date with a hope that felt both foolish and absolutely necessary. Elena wrote letters she never sent, filled journals with words meant for eyes that might never read them, and held on to the memory of kindness in a place designed to strip away softness. If you are watching this story and you believe in the power of love that endures, despite every obstacle, if you believe in second chances and hearts brave enough to wait for what matters most, if this story has touched something deep inside you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to remember that love finds a way even through the darkest places. Your engagement helps these stories reach more hearts that need hope. The day of Elena's release arrived on a Tuesday morning, 7 years and 3 months after the day. Maya had walked out of Westbrook for the last time. Elena stepped through the prison gates carrying everything she owned, in a single bag, her heart beating so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. She looked up and saw Maya waiting on the other side of the parking lot, older now but still herself. Still the woman who had seen her as human when the world saw only a number. Still the one who had given up everything rather than compromise. What they both knew was true. They stood looking at each other across that distance, and then Elena walked forward and Maya walked forward and they met in the middle. No walls between them now. No rules or cameras or consequences except the ones they would choose together. Maya reached out and took Elena's hand, and Elena laced their fingers together. And for the first time in 7 years, they touched with intention and permission, and the kind of joy that comes from waiting for something that was always worth the wait. Before we close this chapter, please take a moment to comment below and tell us what you believe about love that defies boundaries and the courage it takes to wait for what your heart knows is right. Your words matter and your stories inspire others. They walked away from that prison together, toward a future neither of them could fully imagine, but both were willing to build one day at a time. Because some love stories do not follow conventional paths, and some happy endings require more courage than most people will ever need to summon. And sometimes the most beautiful thing in the world is two hearts that refuse to let impossible odds define what they know in their bones is possible after all.